today for another installment of Concord Stories from Special Collections. My name is Anke Voss, and I'm the curator of the William Monroe Special Collections at the Concord Free Public Library. We are honored to have as our guest today Nathanial Smith, Town of Concord's Municipal Archivist, who will take time to talk to us about the New England form of municipal government and the ways in which the Town of Concord Archives preserves the documents and records of the town. Nate received his BA from Penn State. He then worked as a contractor in records management for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers right here in Concord. He went back to school for his MLIS degree at Drexel University and moved to Boston in 2016 to become Chief Archivist for the Boston Planning and Development Agency. He became a certified records manager and a certified archivist in 2018. He started as the Municipal Archivist and records manager for the Town of Concord in October 2019. Nate has lived in Massachusetts all of his life. He recently moved to Bolton with his spouse, Megan. They are expecting their first child in April 2021. Congratulations and welcome, Nate. We're so glad you could join us here today.
I'm glad to be here.
Wonderful. Let me start by saying that many of the town's archive collections are stored at the Concord Free Public Library as part of an agreement between the Town of Concord and the Library Corporation, which owns special collections.
Other town records are also stored at the townhouse. There are 2 vaults in the townhouse that store records, as well as other town buildings that may have a need for certain historical records or records that have not yet been accessioned to the archives. Sometimes we get requests for some of the material that is actually special collections material, and sometimes special collections get requests for town material. If you ask any of us, we will work through your request and figure out where your items are located and how best to service your request so that you can access the material you're interested in. It can be confusing, but we try to make it simple.
What are municipal records and why are they important?
So municipal records, a lot of people associate as the official records of the town. These are, can be as sort of, some people would say mundane as tax records and things like that. And they can be more interesting things like minutes from committees that were created for certain issues in the town over the years. But municipal records really are anything generated by the town government. And that can mean anything from the select board to someone working in a department to the chair of a committee. Anything that is prompted and directed by the town government and the select board would fall under the category of municipal records.
Okay, and I was also going to ask actually, because your role at the town is also as a records manager, how does that relate to your role as archivist?
Sure. So records management, you can look at sort of the records continuum, which can be a little confusing, but generally records are active when they're in use by the committee or board or department that created them. So records are created, they're used, there's maybe a contract that's being enforced or, the active minutes of a select board meeting. And then once those are no longer needed by that board or department or committee, they have what is called a retention period. Some items have a permanent retention, such as meeting minutes. Select board minutes we have in our collection going all the way back to the 1600s. And we will keep all select board minutes for as long as the town government exists. Records management is more about the day-to-day operations of the town. Managing records in an efficient and organized way helps the town departments, boards, committees do their work to keep the town running. When those records are no longer needed because they have served their purpose or they are past their retention, they are then accessioned to the archives, and that is where they are preserved and maintained for future researchers or anyone really who's interested in looking at how the town was run or what programs the town put on or what boards and committees were created at a given time period. The role of the records manager is to keep the town running and make sure that the records are accessible. And then the goal of the archivist is to preserve those records so that generations down the line, researchers and anyone else who's interested can understand how the town worked.
So why are municipal records important?
I find municipal records to be interesting and important for a couple of reasons. First, they really give you context and sort of a chronology to a lot of the events that you may know have happened in town, or the people that have come through town, and things like that. Seeing the official records of where people or events intersected with the government can really give you an idea of the world that those people lived in. We've had many researchers and authors use our records over the years to kind of paint that picture of what the town was like on a day-to-day basis, and then the world that those folks inhabited. The other piece of municipal records that's fascinating is just the detail to me. This is the same with almost all government records, whether it's federal records or county records or any other level of government. There tends to be, especially when things were easier to, when typing and now with computers, just an abundance of information that is captured by the government that enables it to run the town. And these records really can support all sorts of research. There are things that I'm sure we're recording now in our records that won't be of interest for tens of years, decades, but someone will come through and look at those records and build a data set and analyze it in a way that will shed light on the year 2021. And that's just amazing that our work can have that impact that we don't even foresee yet.
Great. I think I agree. Whether it's municipal records or the manuscripts and special collections, they are so valuable, and sometimes we don't actually know how valuable they are going forward, and stories that will be discovered that we haven't even identified or considered. And so their value is infinite.
Absolutely.
Is there a difference between the town archives and special collections at the Concord Free Public Library?
Yes, absolutely. We've talked about this a little, but the town archives is focused on governmental records that were generated, official records that were generated by the town. Special collections inevitably has some records of that type as well, but covers a much wider breadth. And actually, Anka, you can speak to sort of the depth that special collections goes into.
Yes, of course. The manuscripts and materials in special collections document the broad life of citizens and residents of Concord over centuries. And it covers their personal life, their professional life. It covers the literary tradition, and also provides a record that is also not just a written record. So we have many photographs in different formats, and we have film, and we have newspapers. How do town records provide foundation and context for other collections and special collections?
Sure. So, we've come across a number of different records that interact with or intersect with the sort of common knowledge of Concord literary figures or the Revolution, things like that. For instance, and we can actually show this, is we recently, over the last year, located the voting register for when Louisa May Alcott was able to sign up and register to vote in 1879. And she's the first one on the list in the town clerk records. I'll just pull that up. So here you can see Louisa May Alcott is in here as an authoress. At this time, the registers of voters had, as you can see by the insert of the word female, were meant for the male voters of town, and they go back a few years before this in this format. But this was the first year and the first register where they began registering female voters, I believe. they were able to vote in school elections primarily to begin with, and then the vote expanded from there. But this is a good example of, this is someone who we know through her works and through the history around her, and through different stories and movies and all sorts of things. But this is one thing, she's just like everyone else. She had to go register to vote, and I'm sure she was very proud to do it and be at the top of the list. And this record preserves that for all time, for people to see that yep, she was there, and she was one of the first to do it.
Can you give us some other examples of town records and what researchers can learn from them?
So I'm going to take this question as an opportunity to share some of the records from the town archives that I've come across in my year plus in this role, and hopefully these examples will illuminate what can be found at the archives. So last year we went through, just as sort of an exercise to understand the collection better, and we pulled out the town meeting warrants for the year 1720, 1820, and 1920. And I went through and translated the script handwriting, which I know can be daunting for some folks, and even for myself was not the easiest thing to read. And I shared this with a few different people. Some of the moderator was interested in seeing how the meetings had evolved over the years. But you can see on the left here is the original record. This is a scan we took of it. And you can see, quite frankly, the damage that has been done over the 300 years that it's been in town and in the archives. We don't know specifically what it's gone through, but you can see some of the paper starting to deteriorate. And the stamp on the left there, the brown mark is where a stamp likely used to be and fell off. But this is, an example of many of our early records are brittle. Luckily, we've had the fortune of most of them have been microfilmed and several of them have been scanned. But they provide an insight into how the town operated. We still do the town meeting warrant today. We'll do one this year, and it will look different than this, but a lot of the same functions and sort of organization of the town government is similar or the same in some respects. You can see here that this was during a period before the revolution. This is when they're still referring to His Majesty's reign and things of that nature, which is, we think of 300 years ago as a long time ago, but that's actually, things have changed quite a bit in that 300 years. But then also things are still the same. We still do the meeting warrant. So it's interesting to see the contrast. If I just scroll down a couple pages, this is now 1820, so 100 years further down the line, and things have gotten a little different. The paper's bigger. Paper was more abundant at this point. You can still see the marks where, the stamp likely fell off of that paper. We only had 3 selectmen back then running the town. But again, this is, we're still choosing a moderator, and they're voting on building a schoolhouse, which we experience regularly now. So it's really interesting to see. And in this case, I just chose, years that were anniversaries for last year. But if a researcher is looking at specific items or things like that, one of our goals is to make this even more accessible and hopefully digitize a lot of this material so that more people can find it and read it. If we move up to 1920, we can see that now the meeting warrant is recorded in a record book, still in script, but much more formal record book rather than sort of the damaged paper that we saw on some of the earlier records. These records are beginning to get much denser. There's many more items and articles at the town meeting in 1920. And we see the language is a little bit more modern. So it's really, it's an education to see the contrast as things develop over the years, especially with something like meeting warrants where they're serving the same function, but at the same time they're evolving, and just like we will vote on the meeting this year, you can imagine the folks who voted on these items and proposed these items back then. So that's one type of record, the meeting warrants. Another item we have some of, and let me just resize this a little bit. But we have some maps from different, as I said earlier, the town archives has records from all town departments. In this case, we have a zoning plan, which, isn't the most interesting record you've ever heard of, but if you were interested in, you can see some of the finer details here of how streets used to be laid out, how the zoning was. You can understand how much more the railroads were involved in the town. This was in 1928, I believe. So some of these maps can be really informative as to how the town has changed over time. And same as we may not find today's zoning map in 2021 very illuminating. 50 years from now, 30 years from now, the archives preserves those types of maps, and they may actually be very interesting because they may be one of the records that survives and shows how the town laid out and how it changed, in the intervening years.
This is a great example to talk about just the intersection between special collections and the town archives. The town archives will have certain maps, but special collections also holds a pretty large collection and rich collection of other historical maps that anybody doing research on the town, its layout, would also want to consult. So in that sense, having these different records, they complement each other. And also what special collections will also have that again will complement maps, not necessarily from this date. What date is this, Nate? I don't see.
This is 1928, January.
Okay, from 1928. So, we would have photographs of the landscape of homes and businesses at that time. So, in addition to looking at the maps, you could expand your understanding of the visual layout of the town by consulting all these different records.
Here we have another record that I came across when we were processing a new collection. Some records have been stored in the townhouse for, decades now. Semi-processed is what we would call it in the archives world, where they have a general, maybe they have a department and a date on them or a date range, but we don't truly know the detail of what's inside them. And if no researcher has come saying, I want town clerk's records from 1874, then there hasn't been a need to go into them. But in this case, I did have a need to go into this box, and I found this special notice, which I thought was very interesting. It seems the town was having some trouble in the 1870s with folks behaving in rude and disorderly manners. And they passed this bylaw, and you can see the selectmen had this broadsheet drawn up that was then, we can imagine, posted around town so that everyone was aware of this bylaw and the fine of up to $20. So, things like this are, they're not specific to any one thing, but they're just have a general interest. And really, if you were doing research in around 1873, 1874, I think they would provide a little bit more context to sort of the mood and the flavor of the town. We know what it takes to pass a bylaw, and how that's not something you do without a very good reason. And this record, just happens to be one that that is interesting, I think, to a lot of people, and is, you want to know more. As soon as you see this record, you want to know well, what was going on that they passed this, and what was the genesis of this? So maybe you take out the town report from 1873 and look at that, and maybe you try and find other items in the archives, and that's where, again, the intersection. Maybe Anka has some items in special collections from this year and this time, of personal recollections of what was going on, that could also sort of help you understand this time period.
Yes, I was also going to say another resource that would be really helpful is to look at the newspapers at that time, because I'm sure there was a response from the community to this bylaw, and the editorial pages of those early newspapers can be very colorful and insightful. And I'm sure there were residents who had an opinion, and they would have voiced that opinion in those pages. So I would take a look and see what I might find there.
So the town archives doesn't have a lot of media. We have some photos. We have some recordings of select board or town meetings on, some are audio recordings, some are video recordings. There are more from, more recently, there are a lot more audio and visual material that we hope to bring to the archives as they become sort of, they're not being presently used. But this is one item that we do have. It's a 1960 town meeting that was held in the Armory in Concord. And it's just really interesting to see, well, one, it seems like attendance was excellent at town meeting in 1960. So again, this is a photograph, but maybe you then want to go see the warrant from 1960 and see what was there a controversial issue that year. To Anka's point, maybe you then want to pull up the newspapers from 1960. So the intersections within the town archives with other official documents such as the warrant or the minutes, but then the intersection to the special collections. Maybe Anka has and the special collections has in their photo collection photos of this from a different angle or from a different person. And you can, totally build and understand this world. And this could be your starting point, or this could be one of the things you find along the way.
So one question residents might have is a request for archival records the same as a public records request?
The Massachusetts Public Records Law governs a lot of what we can and can't do with our records, and also how the public can get those records. With municipal records being public records, the Public Records Law does apply, but the Public Records Law is relatively new, and it followed on the Freedom of Information Act that was filed at the federal level. So when we take archives requests, we look at them within that framework. We make sure that we are meeting our legal obligations under the Public Records Law. But then we also, because the records, it's harder, because it's more difficult to ask for a specific record from 1682 than it is to ask for a specific record from the year 2000. We try to help researchers along the way and do not the research for them, but we try to provide guidance and ideas of where a type of record may be found in things like this. One of the main goals of the town archives over the next couple of years is to create and update a inventory and create finding aids that will allow for researchers and members of the public to truly understand what is in the town archives and what they need to request. Because a lot of times when we deal with researchers, we get a request and people don't even know what to ask for. They have a subject that they're interested in or a time frame they're interested in, but they don't even really know where to start. And that's one of our goals, from the town archivist to the town clerk to the town manager, is to make those records more accessible to the public.
That's a great goal. So that's wonderful. And that actually leads me into the next question, and this would be a start, is what are the current projects that are happening in the town archives? And what are some of the goals that you have over the next years?
Sure. As with everyone in town, to some degree, the pandemic has interrupted our projects, but we are moving forward on a number of different issues. We recently received a preservation assessment from the Northeast Document Conservation Center, which will enable us to guide our decisions going forward, to preserve our records so that we don't lose physical records to deterioration, and digital records to becoming obsolete. So that'll help. That's one of our main projects, is to ensure that the collection is preserved in all the appropriate ways. Another project, as we may have touched on earlier, is an inventory. Currently, our inventory is internal as we work through. When I began this position, there were a number of competing lists and inventories and databases from previous efforts, and attempting to consolidate those and also confirm the accuracy of those has been a pretty monumental task. As I'm sure any archivist will tell you, everyone has the best intentions when doing inventories and finding aids. But whenever you start in a new position, you find things you would have done differently. You find information that people didn't know before, and putting that all into a format that's friendly for not only a seasoned researcher, but just any member of the public coming to our website, is really one of the key goals to providing access. And that's one thing that we're hoping to really press forward on. Speaking of the website, that was a recent addition to the town clerk's page, was a page for the archives. It's, gives the basic information about what we do and who I am, so that people can get in touch for research requests. But we hope to enhance that and increase the amount of information on there, over the next year or two, so that it really is a portal to all sorts of different research avenues. In addition to that, we've engaged with the Boston Public Library, has a program to do scanning of bound volumes, and we're on the list to get our town report scanned, which again will be a great resource to provide those digitally to anyone who's interested in a searchable format. That project was derailed by the pandemic, but we're hoping to kind of get that back online in the near future. And then with the townhouse, it's currently undergoing renovations, as many of you may know, and we're using that as an opportunity to sort of reassess what is stored there and what is stored at the library special collections, so that we can better serve researchers in the future. It's been a real great opportunity to understand the collection even better from a physical standpoint, and it really provides us with the option to really revamp things in a nice way that I think will increase the efficiency of meeting requests and finding things that people are interested in.
Again, thank you, Nate, so much for your time, for giving us an introduction to the town archives, talking about your current projects and goals, and your many efforts of making town records accessible to our residents, both at the townhouse here in the archives. It's been a pleasure working with you this past year, and I look forward to working with you in the future. Before we go, do you have any other items that you might want to share with our audience?
I did have one more item. I wanted to share some of the excerpts I took from when the pandemic first began. We were looking for information about how the town handled the Spanish flu, in the early 1900s. And there's some interesting excerpts from the Board of Health section of those town reports that I can just share quickly with you all. So this is 1918. And you can see, unfortunately, of course, this report has a large mortality list, being the greatest in the history of the town. And, the thing I found the most interesting here was just the frankness of the language in 1918. They're very straightforward, and hopefully, I don't think we'll write quite like this when we do the town report for 2020. But it was sort of, interesting to see just how they handled it then versus how we're handling it now, and contrast some of that. Though another interesting piece of this, which I thought really, some things change, but some things stay the same. The real work of taking care of the victims of this epidemic was undertaken by the Women's Charitable Society with the aid of the Red Cross. And I think, the charitable spirit in Concord really, has almost always been there. Every time you read into any of these sorts of times of trouble, the charity and the neighborliness of the town, and how everyone helps each other has really comes through. And you see a piece of it here in the town records. And I'm sure if you looked in Anka's records at women who were in the charitable society and who worked for the Red Cross, you'd find even more of it. And I think that is, something we can take away in tough times like this, is that, our some of our best comes out when we're pushed up against the wall. And hopefully, when we write the town report, we'll have lots of examples just like this of groups and individuals stepping up to help the town through this time, and then, look forward to better days ahead.
Thank you, Nate. Yes, we are looking for better days ahead, and for welcoming our public back here in Special Collections, and showing them and sharing with them the town records and Special Collections to do their research. Thank you again for your time, and thank you for joining us today. And thank you all for joining us for another installment of Concord Stories. Thank you to the Concord Free Public Library and the Concord Free Public Library Corporation for sponsoring this series. I look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you.